and welcome to the next episode of the Working Wellbeings podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Judith Grant, workplace wellbeing strategist and the director of the Wellbeing Exchange.
Judith is the former head of wellbeing for the Royal Mail and construction firm Mace, and she shares some fascinating insights into how you can tackle wellbeing strategically across a business. Judith loves data almost as much as me, and we talked about why this is so crucial when tracking progress over time and focusing your wellbeing efforts in the right place.
Judith also talks about her career journey with lots of twists and turns along the way. One for those of you who are looking for some inspiration on the next career step in wellbeing.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Hi Judith, thank you so much for joining us on the Working Wellbeings podcast. It's great to have you here. We're going to jump straight in. I'd love you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your background and what brought you to the stage that you're at now.
It's a big question. Well, I can start with my name. So I'm Dr. Judith Grant. I am a workplace consultant, coach and strategist. And I'm in the process of setting up my own company called the Wellbeing Exchange at the moment. So working on my websites and all that kind of information right now. But my background is in wellbeing. So I've worked in the field of health and wellbeing for about 20 years. And my first degree was in sport and exercise science. So I guess not necessarily directly related to workplace wellbeing. And it was quite lots of changes have happened through my career that got me to this point. But I have a master's in workplace health and wellbeing and a PhD in occupational health psychology. And I've done various kind of courses and things along the way and worked in some big organizations. So I was head of health and wellbeing at the Royal Mail for about 3.5 years. And then director of health and wellbeing at Mace, who are a global construction company, for 5 years. But I've also I worked in a local authority. I had the embarrassing job title of health activator, which basically involved going into schools, community groups, workplaces, talking about healthy eating, exercise, smoking cessation, alcohol, all of these kind of things. And I also ran a weight loss group for obese children over the course of my years working there. And I was also a personal trainer for a few years as well. And I've done various other jobs in sales and again, in the sort of field of wellbeing. And also worked in a kind of office jobs as well, actually. So a really varied range of things that have got me to this point.
Okay. Blinded by the sun.
I've been blind. Suddenly Nottingham has lit up and I've literally...
I don't believe you're in Nottingham.
Yeah, it's been like horrible weather all morning and now suddenly I can't see because it's so sunny.
Are you okay?
So can I ask, just
blind. One moment.
Yeah, no worries.
Perfect.
Still blinded. Good enough.
Oh.
So can I ask, just in terms of timeline then, so it sounds like you've done lots of different things, right? Did you always think that you would end up working in health and wellbeing for big corporate organizations, or what kind of led you there? What were the big transitions, I guess?
Not at all. And I don't think anyone would have anticipated me working in the world of health and wellbeing. So originally, my A-levels were in politics, geography and economics. And I originally went to uni to do an economics degree, but it was really boring. I mean, I found it kind of interesting, but just really not what I wanted to do. And I was really, really overweight and obese as a child and kind of as a teenager. And I lost about 6 stone kind of in between the age of 17 and 20. And it was, or 19. And it was through that period, I started going to a gym. This was after losing the weight, on a step block, doing like a Rosemary Conley, like spandex workout type thing. It was proper 90s. Yeah. But I lost the weight and I was doing this economics degree and I thought, you know what, this isn't actually what I want to do. I feel more confident in myself. I can see the difference in my energy levels, having lost the weight and got healthy and fit. And I want to help other people do that. And that's why, to my parents' absolute horror, I said, right, I'm going to drop out and train as a personal trainer.
Mm-hmm.
And many negotiations ensued. And I agreed to, drop out, train as a personal trainer, but go back to university and do a degree in sport and exercise science, which is what I then did. So I was obviously very lucky that I was able to spend 5 years doing 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees. But yeah, it was that pivot that really got me back interested in working in health and wellbeing. Unfortunately, as I was doing the degree, I was obsessed with running at the time, and I got some really bad injuries. So in my early 20s, I had 6 quite major leg surgeries, and I was unable to work as a personal trainer, which is why I worked in a big office doing kind of admin type stuff, and on the phones being yelled at by angry people, like in customer services. And eventually, after some quite serious leg injuries, I couldn't walk for quite a while. They managed to correct the issues, and I was like, right, now is my opportunity, because it was 5 years I wasn't able to do what I wanted to do. And once I recovered, I got a job at David Lloyd and became a personal trainer. And and then it was off from there. And I think not being able to do what I wanted to do for so long, and also experiencing having a significant injury, which obviously caused psychological challenges as well in the workplace, and I wasn't supported that well by my boss or my employers. That experience, I think, really drove me to be quite ambitious afterwards. I wasn't really that ambitious. I wanted just to be a personal trainer and to help people lose weight. But actually, that kind of holistic experience of being injured made me think, right, okay, well, I've been given a second chance at life. I want to go and, get it and achieve whatever I can. And I think from then on, I've been really sort of ambitious, and nothing's ever quite been, each time I've done a job like personal training, I loved it, really enjoyed working with clients. I also trained young people, and also did healthy eating courses within the gym, that kind of stuff. Really enjoyed it. But I thought, I'm mostly just helping individuals here. I want to have a bigger impact. What can I do? So one of my clients happened to know someone that worked at the council and said, well, there's this job going, working in the health development team. And I thought, well, why not have a go? And I got the job, really low paid. I mean, really low paid, and it was part funded by the NHS, part funded by the council, had all sorts of targets around delivering these courses and things. But all of them were just single interventions, other than the weight loss courses we did. So again, it was that not really seeing an impact that frustrated me. So again, just doing single interventions, I was like, well, this is great. We do a before and after questionnaire. What really am I changing here? And I thought, it's great, I enjoy it, but I need to do more than this. And then from there, I did a qualification in health and safety, because I had a call with someone who was head of health, safety and wellbeing for a large organization. Kind of said, so how on earth, what should I do? How do I get from having a sports science degree and having worked as a personal trainer, how on earth do I make the pivot into organizational wellbeing? What do you do? And he had come from a health and safety background. So I thought, well, that's a good place to start. So it was a NEBOSH qualification. So it was a short one done online while you're working. And that kind of whetted my appetite for learning more, which has become, frankly, an obsession. I just can't stop going on courses and things. So I did, after completing the health and safety qualification, I then got a place at Nottingham University to do the master's in workplace health and wellbeing. And it was when I was researching the first module, I was still working at the council, and I was looking at workplace health interventions. And I found this really interesting company called the GCC, which is Global Corporate Challenge, which doesn't exist anymore. It was bought by Virgin Pulse. But And I thought, oh, this sounds like an interesting organisation. So I emailed them and said, have you got any jobs? And they said they were in London, which was a lie. They were in York. But I went for an interview in York and they offered me a job in business development. And I was like, yeah, why not? So I left Nottingham, which is where I was living at that time, and moved up to York and Leeds for a few years and worked at the GCC. And that was quite different because that was sales, really. But I met hundreds, maybe thousands, in fact, of different organisations trying to sell them the GCC and supporting them as they took part in the GCC, which is like a 12-week health and wellbeing program. And yeah, I met so many people that was really, really good for exposing myself to all sorts of different approaches to workplace health and wellbeing. So continued on doing the masters whilst working full time. And it was on the masters that I then met the director of health, safety and wellbeing at the Royal Mail, who one lunchtime I sat down next to him and tried to sell him the GCC. That's how shameless I am. I thought, yeah, nice guy, really lovely guy, got chatting. And it turned out that rather than necessarily selling the GCC, I obviously promoted myself. And a number of months later, he phoned and said, we've got this job at the Royal Mail. Are you interested in applying for it? And I was like, yes, okay. And it was, again, going from a workplace health sales role to apply for head of occupational health and wellbeing at Royal Mail was a pretty massive jump. And it, yeah, 3 pretty epic interviews, but I got it.
Wow.
And it was one exceptional learning curve because I had to manage the occupational health contract, which was one of the biggest in the UK at the time, manage all the fitness and wellbeing providers for the organisation, come up with a wellbeing strategy. And there's 140,000 employees. And I was the only person I was part of the health, safety and wellbeing team, but I was the only person with just health and wellbeing in my job title, which in an organisation that large can be quite challenging on the inbox. And yeah, and then I worked at Royal Mail. If you want to ask me any questions, feel free. I realise I'm just giving the entire parade of my life history. But yeah, so Royal Mail was a massive learning curve, but I was lucky that I had a great boss. So yeah, fantastic boss, Sean Davis, and Dr. Sean Davis. Apologies. Yeah, worked with really great team. It was challenging. We had 2 trade unions. So kind of doing anything involved negotiations with so many different groups of people. I was part of the health, safety and wellbeing team, which is part of HR, but then you've got employee reward and so many departments for just such a large organisation. So it was pretty complex. So yeah, I worked there for 3.5 years and then kind of felt like I was ready for a change. I lived in Nottingham at the time, but spent like 3 days a week in London. And I was looking for a change, and then Mace approached me, and I became head of health and wellbeing at Mace, and then eventually promoted to director of health and wellbeing. I was there for 5 years, left in August last year, and had a bit of a break, which I have not had a break in a long time. And I've been setting up on my own, doing consultancy and coaching work. When I did a PhD whilst I was working at the Royal Mail, just chill. Yeah. That's why I needed a bit of a break.
Yeah, I can imagine. Oh, how exciting! What an exciting career! And it sounds like it's really diverse, isn't it? And coming from a place of a personal motivation and a personal story as well, which I really, really love. I think it's such an important part of this work is to really be able to relate to how people feel and what people need. It's definitely a quality I would think needs to, you have to have a lot of empathy and understanding to do this work in this space. And great to hear those examples as well of making your way through your career and how it's navigated. I feel like there's probably some shifts happening, isn't there, in the recruitment processes and the jobs that are out there. But I definitely would encourage listeners to be inspired by your journey of navigating your career.
And the continuous learning as well.
Yeah,
that's not always something that you see, is it? Like learning alongside the workplace to kind of bring those skills up as well.
yeah.
Do you mind if I jump in? I've just got a quick question.
Yeah.
How was working with the unions?
You know what, I actually really enjoyed it because we had a shared, well, an almost shared purpose. So
of course.
So in terms of, you know, a way for an organization to connect with the unions, actually wellbeing is a fantastic tool, because ultimately we care about the employees' wellbeing, they care about their members' wellbeing. So it's a good place, I think, to kind of make those connections and build relationships. So one of the big things I did at the Royal Mail was put in place a stress policy and approach to managing stress in the workplace, which was stressful, obviously, as every wellbeing practitioner will know. It's not an easy process, but with the unions it was more challenging, because we had to kind of negotiate every step of the process, and I had to take every draft to different unions and different parts of the unions, there was lots of back and forth, and then obviously get it signed off by the organisation and different parts of the organisation as well. So it's an added layer of complexity, but if you can build up a good relationship with them, as I did, then they can really help and support. And many of the members, the CWU and CMA, which are the two unions, their members became wellbeing champions really across the organisation. So they can become they became real advocates of the work that we're doing and promoted a lot of the services that we were trying to promote. So they became part of the wider the team, which was fantastic.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, a number of these conversations that we've had, we ask people about, we can ask you as well, about the skills that you think are required to be a good wellbeing leader. But one of the ones that has come up, I think everyone's talked about it, is the ability to like forge good relationships, but also influence people at the same time. Because you don't always have necessarily, I guess, the you know, not from an operations perspective, it's like this just has to happen. You can't mandate things when it comes to wellbeing, nor would you want to, I don't think. Or maybe, I don't know. But maybe that would help. But yeah, it's more about that, building the relationships, influencing people almost from the bottom up as much as anything.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important part of the job. You've got to be able to relate to people at all levels of the organisation. And I think every conversation counts, not only within the organisation but externally. So when, I guess, the habit I made from working at the GCC and working in sales, obviously I used to meet with hundreds of organisations trying to sell them stuff, but I actually continued meeting with lots of organisations when I was at the Royal Mail and at Mace, just generally exchanging ideas and sharing what we were up to, and actually sharing some of the documents that we'd written within the organisations with others, certainly smaller companies as well that perhaps didn't have the resources that we had access to. And actually all of those conversations count. I think sort of the more you can get the message around your wellbeing programme externally out of the organisation, often the more they'll listen internally. And that was one of the reasons at the Royal Mail. I mean, I did so much public speaking. Obviously, I like talking, as you can probably tell, but I did loads of public speaking. And it was when people were like, oh, saw you were doing this, or, you know, I post on LinkedIn about some of the talks I've done. People are like, oh, see, you've done that. And actually, people will be able to hearing the messages more externally than maybe they were through some of the internal communications channels, because, you know, our internal comms teams have such a difficult job because everyone wants to say something in an organization, and employees are just bombarded with messages. So, you know, sometimes the messages and the support available doesn't get through. So actually being able to go on about it externally can help you internally. And that's has also helped with getting sort of senior members of organizations on board. So I started doing an unimaginatively named Wellbeing Weekly newsletter in the Royal Mail, sort of every Wednesday, and I did it without the permission of the without the permission of the comms team, which was and when they eventually tried to shut it down, it was already going to all of the, many of the senior leadership team in the business, and it was going to, well, thousands of people across the organization. So one of the board members stepped in and stopped them stopping it, because he'd been enjoying my musings, because they were kind of like with anecdotes and but important messages each week. I'd have a theme. I mean, it was hard work, actually. I think it went for like 60 weeks or something, so it was quite challenging coming up with new topics every single week, but it was a good way of raising the profile and kind of guerrilla marketing, I suppose, the kind of work we were doing. So I'm not saying you should always go against your the inner workings of the organization, but sometimes the only way to get ahead is to bend the rules a little bit.
Yeah, and people don't know what they don't know, right? So you really do need to do this role. We need to be the voice and the advocate.
That's it. Exactly.
Well done for doing that. Can I jump in with a question that's off-piste as well? I actually have two. First one, I guess, whilst we're talking about Royal Mail, but Mace as well, and you've mentioned wellbeing champions and discussing that kind of the process of advocates. Wellbeing champions, I know that they would have come up for you. That would have been a process that you had at Royal Mail. That's right, isn't it? To have wellbeing champions in place.
To be honest, I can't remember what we called them, but we had something along those lines.
Like that. What can you say in terms of, I guess, kind of practically about those roles? I've had some experience of that role in an NHS setting, and it can be really challenging in a large organisation to make those roles work. Like, what do you think the best purpose of that role is?
I think it's been, I guess, spokespeople for the the strategic approach to wellbeing in the organisation. So it's very difficult to keep people, enthusiastic people, on point sometimes, because when people are passionate about wellbeing, they want to talk about all sorts of wellbeing topics. But I think the challenge is making sure that everyone's on message, because if you're trying to communicate quite a tailored, specific strategy across the organisation, you want people who are going to be amplifying that across the organisation, and keeping on message, and also not taking too much on themselves. I think that can be a real challenge, and certainly one of my concerns with mental health first aiders or mental health champions or wellbeing champions, whatever you call them, is that often organisations don't have safeguarding in place to support those individuals, and it can also detract from conversations that line managers should be having with employees. So it's the line manager's responsibility, or to have, if one of their employees is struggling, you would hope the line manager, or maybe manager above that, would be available to have a conversation and can often help work through some of the workplace issues. Often mental health first aiders can be used so that line managers can get out of having those conversations. Same with wellbeing champions. One thing we did, so I have been working with King's College London for quite a few years. Every year I support master's students doing their projects. And a few years ago, we had a student do some research on our wellbeing champion network at Mace, on what we needed to do better to support them and get feedback. It wasn't as painful as I thought it could be. We had to take a bit of an ego hit, but essentially we hadn't set it up in a clear enough way in terms of their role and responsibility. So we made sure there were clear terms of reference for the role. What does it involve? We knew we needed to better organise the network other than just having a giant spreadsheet. So I think we used Yammer, or one of those kind of groups on Team Microsoft packages things, to kind of structure the champions so that they could have better conversations amongst themselves. We knew we didn't have regular enough meetups for them, which again is something that we corrected afterwards. And some of the feedback was that people didn't feel that they had enough time to do it as well as their full-time jobs. And that, I'm afraid, is always going to be an issue. You know, organizations are paying people to do their jobs, and the wellbeing champion role will often be, will just be an add-on. So it's helping people to manage people's expectations. But the research that we got back was really useful, and we were able to act on that, because I think with any programs, you've got to get feedback, and it's good if it can be a master's student's project, so they can get a degree as well.
Yeah,
that is handy. And also just organisationally, from a sort of leadership point of view, being really getting that buy-in that those wellbeing champions are spending that X, even if it's just 1 hour a month, you know, they're spending that amount of time, and making sure that those approvals are in place and that support's there, so that the time they do have can be feel supported.
And we had targets. So the thing I had look at the questions you sent over. The thing I'm most proud of, actually, in Mace was it's the most strategic approach to wellbeing that kind of put together. So over 5 years, we did a massive data collection project. So we worked with Robertson Cooper and have 5 years of longitudinal data looking at the impact of all sorts of things going on in the organization on people's well-being. And with that data, every year or a couple of times a year, I presented to the group board. I had 2 hours with them, which, I got a bit of time with senior leaders in my previous organization, but to be, in front of the group board for that long being grilled is painful, but useful. And in the first year of data collection, they were like, well, this is all very interesting. And they didn't want action plans or anything like that. And I was like, okay, fine, we'll go with it. So when I presented the data, second year, we did the data, and we asked people, has anything changed as a result of doing this wellbeing survey? And a significant amount of people, I think 60-something% people said, no, nothing's changed. And in fact, it might be more than that. And the board were like, what? This is terrible. We need action plans. I was like, brilliant. Yeah, good idea. Great. So we put in place action plans. And then eventually, the year after, we got KPIs in place, which then became tied to the senior leaders' performance, their balanced scorecards. So it's part of bonus. So, and the KPIs were around improving metrics in terms of wellbeing survey, but also around how many wellbeing ambassadors you have, and attending mental health training and various other kind of more operational type targets. So yeah, being able to get that as a board priority was really important, and that helped us increase the number of wellbeing ambassadors and improve the support for them. One of the challenges you get when it becomes targeted is, of course, people being forced to do it. So there's that balance of departments that perhaps aren't as bought into the world of wellbeing as others, and they're like, right, you're the wellbeing ambassador, and obviously those ambassadors are perhaps not going to be as engaged as the people who step forward themselves and want to do it. But when you're thinking at scale in an organization, actually it's a good approach. It works.
What do you think convinced the board? Was it just the data, or was it, I don't know, like they're a safety conscious organization? Or
so I mean, it was the data. It was, it's obviously how we presented it.
We talked about the influencing, didn't we? Yeah.
No, it was a combination of things. So working with an external consultancy organization, obviously I would say this given now I'm an external consultant, but working with an external consultancy agency was actually really important, because I could have said all of that as much as I'd liked, but often organizations like to get someone external just to confirm that, even though you're an expert in it. But and the company we work with obviously had the facility to collect a lot of data. And in that initial, before we started, I said, look, I'm not going to put a strategy in place. You brought me in as a strategic role. I'm not going to put a strategy in place without baselining what wellbeing is in the organization. So we took quite a lot of time interviewing each board member and other senior leaders and others within the organisation, trying to understand kind of what their take on wellbeing was. And it was quite varied. So there were some on the board that perhaps weren't as engaged as others. But for me, it was helpful understanding, where each of them was coming from and what their priorities were, because, it needed to be sold as a business priority. And, trying to collect the data and tie it to business metrics became really the focus of what we were doing, and help get investment each year, because it was a huge outlay. But I think by that point, the board realised that it was important, and many of them were engaged with it, and we did some great stuff as well. So many of them, the board got involved with campaigns around mental health, we had a wellbeing week, which I'm not a big fan of wellbeing weeks, but you've got to. But the fact is, the board really got engaged with it, and did all sorts of things. So I think another sort of proud moment is when one of our senior leaders, who he's a hardened kind of construction director, tough chap, but did a mental health talk, and honestly, like, people were nearly crying in the room. Like, he really opened up. It was just amazing, and I just thought, wow, what a change for in quite a typically tough type industry, for people to be having these conversations. It's it's amazing, and some of that is a reflection on what was going on outside the organisation. So obviously, in the 10 years that I was at Royal Mail and Mace, I think the backdrop of wellbeing and how we're talking about mental health has changed considerably. So that's helped. But being able to get the board involved, slowly and steadily, and sort of prove the business benefits has been really helpful.
Yeah, that's good.
Amazing. Can I ask my other question?
Sorry, I just keep talking.
No. That was more a question for Matt. Like, can I go next? And my other question is a bit of a practical one. So you obviously talked about the Global Corporate Challenge, and you talked about both Mace and Royal Mail, and managing the portfolio of kind of activities and stuff. And I think this is always a really interesting one, because there isn't a blueprint for this, and we are always trying to innovate and inspire our workforce and pick things that relate to the workforce that we have. So with the Global Corporate Challenge, which doesn't exist anymore, but there obviously are other things out there. My background is actually with Movember.
Okay.
So we may well cross paths, because I know that both Royal Mail and Mace have been very engaged in the Movember campaign. And so it's a question around the use of those things like the Global Corporate Challenge, Movember, so charitable things, or stuff that might come from people like Virgin and Vitality and things like what. How useful do you think those things are, and how much of the well-being strategy and activity should they make up? Like, I'm obviously a huge advocate for them, and I think they're really useful ways of engaging externally the well-being of your workforce. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
So I think, I guess my premise is, once you've got the sort of your baseline and you understand the well-being of the organisation, and that means the risk as well. So both my roles have been health and safety. So understanding health risk as well as what I call well-being opportunities. Once you've kind of got that mapped out, then absolutely, I think there's a place for all sorts of collaborations, whether it's with the health charities or wellbeing providers. But it's understanding, I think many organisations buy lots of stuff and then don't really know what they're doing with it or how it overlaps. And I think something organisations should maybe think about. Often there's just one person, isn't there, in a kind of wellbeing role in an organisation. In Royal Mail, there were, I think, 3 or 4 of us by the time I left. In Mace, there were 4 of us by the time I left, which is pretty good given it's an organisation of only like 8,000 employees. But I think it should be a person's role. If you've got a lot of wellbeing suppliers, then it shouldn't be an add-on to someone's job. It should be someone's job to manage those relationships effectively. Sometimes it's managed in employee reward anyway. So I think having we had strategic health and wellbeing group at Royal Mail. So people from different parts of HR, employee reward, industrial relations, the unions, senior leaders from the organisation, myself, we had a senior ergonomist, all sorts of different roles sat on that. And then we were able to discuss what we did. We had and our occupational health provider came to that as well as some other external providers. So in that way, that kind of collaboration, then the different suppliers get to know who you're working with, what you're doing. It enables, I think, better sharing of data and intelligence between your suppliers. And also for an organization, you can save money, because if you realize there's loads of overlap, like why on earth are you buying all this stuff? And if people aren't using it, why not? You need that data. So I think it should, ideally, there should be a role, and there was at the Royal Mail in the end, to manage those systems basically, and suppliers. I work closely. One of my best friends now actually is one of the heads of procurement at Royal Mail, because we spent so long together, talking about the occupational health contract and the wellbeing contracts, and always we were arguing, because she wanted to get money out of them, and I wanted to get value out of them, and and that's actually quite a good thing, or good position to put yourself in, actually, is making friends or frenemies with maybe the finance teams, procurement, and those kind of people as well, because it's to challenge you. Because as a wellbeing, someone who's really interested in wellbeing, I want lots of lovely stuff for my employees, but I need to prove to my managers that they're value for money and they're working. So actually having a critical friend for you to sort of argue the case and why you need those contracts, I think is helpful. And working with charities is brilliant, because for CSR, and certainly in Mace, the approach to ESG, massive. So our community engagement was a big part of that, and that's where they worked with Movember and various other charities and things as well. And I think that's great, because people want to get out there and fundraise, and it's also kind of lower cost to the organisation as well. And often these charities have got fantastic free resources as well, which if you don't have much money as an organisation to spend on wellbeing, you should certainly be capitalising on those.
Yeah, there's a lot that can be achieved, can't there? And obviously, as we know, a lot of this work is being done across different organisations with very different budgets and things. So using the charities can be very helpful.
And using universities as well. So that's one. So as I said, I've worked with King's College for a number of years now. And in fact, I'll be looking for my student I'm supporting this year. Obviously, I'm no longer tied to an organisation, so we're about to look for an organisation who wants to take part in her research. But I've had lots of different universities do basically free research on different parts of our programmes in organisations, which is great, because you're giving that student the experience, building connections with them as well, and you're helping the next generation of wellbeing people get on as well. So I think it's a really good thing to do as a company.
Yeah. What's the actual course that you're supporting on there, if you don't mind me asking?
That's right. It's the MSc in Organisational Psychiatry and Psychology.
Yeah.
I always feel like I'm cheating on Nottingham, which is where I did my Masters in Workplace Health and Wellbeing, but I do get involved with them too. So.
Share the love, Judith.
Yeah. I was going to bring a bit of positivity to the conversation. You've talked a lot about
were we not being positive?
No, this is a joke. So you talk about what you're proud of. I want to know what you messed up along the way. So were there any kind of failures? Were there any things that you think, do you know what, I could have done that slightly differently? Or
yeah, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I am quite hypercritical, so I will mull over things a bit too much when I need to move on. I think probably initially when I joined the Royal Mail, I was all all guns blazing, really, wellbeing, amazing, want to tell everyone about it. And I didn't understand the organisation. It was complex, but I didn't really understand business. I hadn't when I was trying to sell the GCC into organisations, I met with loads of them, but I never really properly understood the constraints on their time and budget until I was in the organisation and faced with a limited budget and limited time and loads of people trying to sell me stuff. But I was very lucky that the Royal Mail put me on an executive leadership development programme, which is essentially a mini MBA at Oxford Uni, which was cool. But it was brilliant because there were people, kind of senior leaders from across Royal Mail in totally different areas doing totally different things. And that really brought me down to earth. And I realised, my goodness, I've been making some quite big errors in the way I've been talking to people or talking at people. I think that encouraged me to slow down and really listen. And certainly in big businesses where, you know, the ultimate aim is to make money and to, you know, and that helps pay people, which is pretty good for your well-being ultimately. These need to be commercial decisions, and I was focusing on well-being as, you know, the right thing to do, ethically great, you know, but actually I needed to focus on it as a commercial decision. And I think that made me a bit more hard-headed. And was really useful. I'm not saying everyone needs to go and do an MBA or anything, although I think doing kind of various courses or business courses outside of your area is important. I've done lots of training courses now that have nothing to do with wellbeing, or are kind of on the outskirts of what I do, just because you never know where good ideas might come from, or, you know, helping in conversation. I used to read The Economist to work every day because, it just made me look intelligent on the train, you know. Like, yeah, check me out, my Economist. But actually, I found it interesting, and you get the language. You're starting. We speak a wellbeing language. Every organisation speaks a different language. You've just got to learn the commercial language of your business, and I think that's how you then you get taken more seriously. And I think how I was able to progress and get encouraged to promote me and all those kind of things, because I can talk commercially now.
That's so true. That's so true. We heard that we ran a conference last year, and we had a speaker talking about one of the things that stuck with me was they mentioned a similar thing. They mentioned that, like, business acumen in terms of navigating that role. Because I think when you speak to people in this space, the passion for the subject's almost a given, right? You know, that's what brought them towards it. But what really sets those people who are really successful with it apart are perhaps things like that, you know, the other strings that you've got to your bow as well that will help you to eventually achieve the goal that you're looking to achieve.
I think another thing maybe I could have done better actually is looking after myself sometimes. So I think as a fitness wellbeing person, and I'm generalizing, maybe not the same for everyone, but, you know, I would be, certainly in my previous job, you know, commuting, I'd get up at like 5:30, like smash myself on my like Bowflex Max HIIT workout a few times a week, you know, work longish hours. I tried to, you know, keep to decent hours, because obviously you've got to be an advocate for what you're selling, but it's not always that easy. And I was quite burnt out. I was off, I caught COVID in March 2020, and I was off sick for 2 years. So it's worth saying that 2 years of my Mace employment, I was off sick, which in itself, I mean, it was horrible because I was very, very ill, but again, has been a really useful learning experience in terms of being on the other side of illness in the workplace, and how you support it, how you can better support people, etc., etc. And also, you know, I think I was quite burnt out, not because of the organisation, but because of myself. I just drove myself so hard. I think when you're so driven because you want to help people, sometimes that can be at the expense of yourself. So I think as wellbeing professionals, you know, it can be easy to forget that. So now, like, I meditate every day. I've really changed. I meditate every day, and I do Pilates, and I'm kind of easing myself back into doing consultancy work and being really strict with my hours, and just kind of trying to look after myself a lot better. And encourage other people to do that too. And And I suppose just on that, when people work in the psychology or counselling professions, often they have a mentor, or they have a person that they have to do supervision with, just as part of downloading, someone else who you have that confidential conversation to download whatever's happened. For wellbeing professionals who don't get that yet, the amount of kind of suicide risk, or in fact suicides and mental health crises that we will have to deal with, sadly, in our organisations, or other really difficult situations, often we don't have that support, and people come to you with all sorts of issues. And then if you don't have someone confidential, someone there to support you to download that can really build up, and that can be a problem. So again, I'd say I'm a big advocate of coaching. I've had all sorts of coaches and mentors through my career. So I think having someone you can confidentially download those conversations with is really, really important for your own mental well-being.
Absolutely. We're really hoping that the Working Well community can play a role in that, either through formal mentoring and coaching, or just the peer-to-peer element. Yeah, we couldn't agree more. Should we just think a little bit about time? Should we one of the things we wanted to chat a little bit about the industry today. You're taking this pivot in your career, and as you acknowledge the external environment, the way that we are talking about mental health, or talk about well-being generally outside of the workplace included, has dramatically changed over the past 10 years. So where do you think we're at in terms of this work? And of course, what you've also mentioned in the last 5 minutes is to do with the commercial aspect of the considerations within an organisation. But can we be more aware and accepting that we need to look after people just because we need to look after people?
Yeah, I think so. So I think last 10-20 years, like, conversations around mental health and wellbeing and menopause and financial wellbeing, these are things perhaps that just weren't happening so openly. So I think people are, or many organizations are, more willing to be open and have those conversations. I think we're at a stage where there are some bigger organizations with bigger budgets that are doing some amazing things, because professional services companies, again, perhaps because they have more budget, more buy-in, are able to do all sorts of things. But there are obviously many organisations that don't have wellbeing support. So I think there's a danger of almost two-tiered type system. We've got divide in sort of socioeconomic divide in healthcare almost happening at the moment, where the delays on the NHS are just humongous. Many organisations with private medical insurance, it's great. Their employees may be able to access them, but many organisations, perhaps in the gig economy or in smaller organisations, they can't access that kind of private medical insurance, and they're on waiting lists. And so I think there's a danger now that it's kind of becoming a two-tiered or many-tiered kind of approach around health and wellbeing. So I think the awareness is there. Many organisations know they need to be doing something, but they're not sure what. So perhaps they will start off with kind of the fancy things that they see advertised, and go for easy things, which is good. It's a good way to start, but they're not necessarily thinking strategically. I think the organisations who are doing it well, I'm obsessed with strategy here, are obviously thinking about it strategically and not just in isolation, because globally, obviously the conversations around ESG are expanding. Many organisations obviously are focused on sustainability with the climate emergency, etc. And wellbeing can very much be tied into that. Same with the equality, diversity, inclusion movement as well. All of these agendas actually need to be brought together. And I think the organisations doing it well are bringing all those areas of expertise. Like so many people, you know, I look at people, as you will have done from all, you know, the interviews you're doing and setting up your network. People who work in wellbeing come from such a diverse background, such a diverse group. And in organizations, if you can kind of harness that diversity of thought from different departments, different people, then you're going to get the best approach to wellbeing. If it's isolated and just, you know, tokenistic, then you're not. So I think huge strides have been made, but I think there's huge opportunities, and certainly, as I say, with ESG and with responsible investing, I think there's more onus on organizations, certainly private sector ones. You know, if that's what's going to keep their shareholders happy, then they will invest in that area. And you know, even with obviously NHS have got great programs around wellbeing, trying to support their employees, although obviously it's a far more complex things that they've got to manage at the moment. But yeah, so we're making progress, but there's still a long way to go.
Still excited about it?
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, for me, I'm kind of, you know, going from having worked in big organizations to being on my own is really nerve-wracking. So I veer from absolute confidence that I'll be really good to, oh my God, what am I doing? Every day, in fact. So, but yeah, already I'm having some really good conversations with interesting people, and I'm also going into coaching as well as consulting, just because I've got so much from coaching myself that I think it's a really important thing to help others within the workplace as well.
Oh, amazing. Well, we'll definitely have to learn more from you about that sometime, so that we can hopefully introduce some of our members to you and get something going there.
Yeah, definitely. Can I ask one last question before time's up? Just because I like asking it. We sent you this beforehand as well, but are there any other questions that you wish we'd asked you today, and how would you answer?
It's a good question. I mean, I probably just talked, so I probably just told you everything that I thought you. I don't know. I think. I probably should. I mean, I didn't spend a long time looking at the question beforehand. I probably should have spent longer thinking about it. But I mean, I'm interested actually in the diversity of the world of health and well-being. I guess. No, I can't think of anything. I was thinking about people from different backgrounds, but we kind of already talked about that. So I can't come up with anything intelligent. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. No. It means that we asked you all the questions we needed to, right?
I peaked earlier on.
Well, it was wonderful to hear your story, Judith. It really was. There's a lot in there that I think our listeners will be able to take away and be inspired by.
We need to ask you, what's next? You talked a little bit about it. Is there anything you want to plug to our audience, and where can listeners find you as well?
So my website is under construction at the moment. So I will be on www.thewellbeingexchange.co.uk. It currently says under construction. So hopefully by February, I'll have launched my website and my new branding. I've got a logo and everything, which is very exciting. So I'm kind of, because I've been so unwell for so long, I really am just easing myself back into it. I'm speaking at a few conferences this year. So if anyone wants to connect, just connect with me on LinkedIn and you'll be able to see what I'm up to. And I will be posting a lot more in the coming, weeks, once I've got my logo, and need to start the exciting process of selling myself.
Oh, well, it's exciting. All the best with it, Judith. And glad to hear that you're feeling better and that your health is improving.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, we're here for you in the running small business world. If you
I'm sure I could definitely. It would be great to pick your brains as well, because obviously you've both been doing it a lot longer. So yeah, absolutely. I'd love to get your tips and how I can get myself out there.
Yeah, we'll come on your podcast next. That's the plan.
Seems like a lot of effort doing a podcast.
Yeah, I guess so. Right, it's been a pleasure. Time's up, I'm afraid. Wish we could carry on, but yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure we'll hear more from you through the community in future as well. I hope we do. And yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.